for Luke Brosterhous. Luke is our mindset performance coach with the club, working primarily with high school age athletes. And he's had a tremendously positive impact on the club in the 4 years that he's been with us in this role. He has a master's in sports psych from the University of Utah. He's also a PGA professional and does a lot of work nationally, internationally with golf instruction and working with NGBs around the world, and has a tremendous skill set from that world that he brings to our world with snow sports as well. He also has 2 kids in the club in cross country. So he's a parent as well and brings that experience too, which is fabulous. And when Luke started with the club 4 years ago, there's 2 real reasons having a mindset performance coach with the club. And the one is pretty obvious. I think that mindset and mental skills are as important as anything that happens on snow for performance and for enjoyment. You know, those skills are so fundamental, so foundational for performance and having a great experience in sport. But I think the bigger reason, and what's really most compelling for me, is that those skills that you learn through sport, through plugging in with Luke's program for mindset performance, apply to every walk of life, right? So to academics, to work, to relationships, and are really, I think, the foundation of just well-being. And I think that lasts for the rest of everyone's life. So those skills are applied on the hill, in the sport, and have so much meaning there, but they also translate so much off the sport. There's a reason why I think many of you enroll your kids in the club and look for those skills to be developed and then take them for the rest of their life in their working life, professional life, personal life. So what Luke's doing with the club is as important or maybe more important than anything else we're doing. So with that, I'll let Luke start it and present tonight, and I'm so happy to have you here and happy working with the club. So thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming. We're going to start tonight with a little exercise. I'm going to have these blue sticky notes passed around, and what I'd like for you to do is take a minute and just ask the question I have up on the screen. Think about this and write down 2 to 3 words that would answer this question. So what is it that you want for your athletes as they engage in sport? And we've got some pens that are coming around. Give you a minute to kind of get organized with that. That'll give me a minute to see if I can adjust my presentation here. Naturally, you get it all set up and then something isn't quite right before you start. And that's kind of like competition. So what is it that you want for your athletes? And if you don't have an athlete, if you are not a parent, just write what you want. What do you want as a result of participating in this basketball? And I'm going to go ahead and start with some slides, and you can go ahead and just write on that sticky note again, just 2 or 3 words. And when you're done, just go ahead and pass those down to the outside person on your aisle, if you wouldn't mind. Dave's going to come around and pick those up. So what's at stake? There's a lot of research right now that is a little bit concerning in and around youth sport. National Alliance for Youth Sport is basically surveying kids and finding that 35% of kids who play youth sport drop out after the first year of competition. 85% of those that continue to play will drop out somewhere between 10 and 17. And the reasons that they're citing for leaving youth sport are the same reasons that they're citing for turning to things like video games. So what are those reasons? They want action, they want freedom to make mistakes, and most of all, they want control over their own activity. Okay? I have the term enjoyer at the bottom here. It's the root word for the term enjoy, right? It's the old French word, and my wife would probably correct me on this. Enjoyer means to give joy, right? It doesn't mean to receive joy, but it's an actual verb. It's an activity that we put forth to put into something in order to enjoy. And when you ask kids, what do they want? Usually their response is, I just want to have fun, right? I just want to enjoy it. But when you drill down a little bit deeper, trying their best is number 1. when coaches treat them with respect is number 2. Getting playing time, playing on a team, and getting along with their teammate. Number 48 on the list is winning. Number 63 is playing in tournaments, traveling to play new places, and medals and trophies down there in the 60s. Pretty interesting when you drill down, right? So, we set out a couple years ago, as Dave mentioned, to create a program that would create an online platform where athletes could go and engage in mindset performance training program. And we really took what are the core mental performance competencies, what are the most important ones, and we put them into these 4 categories: energy, imagery, motivation, and flow. So I'm going to give you an overview of what this program looks like tonight. I'm going to give you some of the research that we based it on, and then I'm going to offer some food for thought in terms of how we can collectively cultivate the best environment for mindset performance. Just to give you a little context of how I got here, because I truly believe that our experiences shape who we are and what kind of product we put out into the world. I went to the University of Oregon, I studied philosophy. I went on to work here at the Winter Sports Club in 2001 as an alpine coach for several years, which was a fantastic experience that left me with more questions than answers. In my mid-20s, trying to understand what was coaching all about? What was I trying to do? Eventually, my passion for golf, I grew up ski racing and playing golf, my passion for golf took over. I played professionally for a number of years, and I got into teaching and coaching, which eventually led me to Utah, where I studied sports psych. And I have a picture, does anybody know who that is on the lower left there? Any philosophers? So that is John Dewey. He was an American philosopher. I actually did an honors thesis on John Dewey's philosophy or freedom of education, right? And John Dewey felt like the point of education and the point of life was to be able to cultivate the ability to stop and think. Okay? So I'm going to touch on that a little bit further down the road, primarily because I can remember 25 years ago my dad asking me what I was going to do as a philosophy major. And if I could tell him I was going to stand in front of a room of 40 parents and tell them how to enhance their child's mindset performance skills, I think he would have accepted that at the time. I operate and coach an indoor facility here in town, golf facility. I also work for the Royal Moroccan Golf Federation, which is headed up by this guy, Prince Moulay Rashid, who is an absolute intimidating figure to be around, as you can see by the picture. So when I'm in Morocco, I'm coaching national team players. I'm primarily responsible for their performance coaching plans. So I look at what is their annual tournament program look like, what is their competition plan, what is their technical and tactical strategy, and how do we create an environment that will help achieve all of that. He's the second prince I worked for, actually. This was the first prince I worked for in Bhutan, who was more interested in going out and having fun on the golf course, and I was just kind of along for the ride. He would ask me questions about the U.S. But I bring him up because, has anybody been to Bhutan before? So Bhutan is an interesting place. They don't measure gross domestic product as a country. They measure gross national happiness. So this was an initiative that they set out back in the early 2000s. They said, hey, we're not going to measure ourselves compared to everything else in the world. We want to measure ourselves based on the happiness of our citizens. Turns out that's difficult to measure, right? So how do we measure success? Turns out that's difficult to measure in sport. At the top levels, messages are being sent overtly and covertly. And I'll play this quick video because I think this is sort of a comical way, maybe a little too serious, but very real in the sense of what happened. This is an NFL coach.
The greatest thing about sports is you play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out. because it matters.
So that was a press conference a few years ago. Herm Edwards, coach for the Jets. He was obviously coming off of a loss, but it's a funny clip because it really elucidates this message that's out there. Whether or not we're bringing it up at home, kids are hearing it. At the highest levels, the professionalization, it's about winning, right? However, when we talk about how we're going to measure success in terms of mindset performance, for us, it's about how often and how frequently we can lead kids into what we call a flow state. And flow is a very well-researched, well-documented state that is attainable through a specific set of conditions, right? And those conditions are clarity of goals, clear and immediate feedback, the proper challenge skill balance, and focus on the task at hand. So let's just start with focus. And that's really the part of our, the cornerstone of our energy pillar is how do we focus as athletes? There's some coaches in the room here, and I would just ask this question. Feel free to jump in there. What are you seeing in terms of your athletes on a day-to-day basis relative to the ones that can focus for specific amounts of times versus ones that can't? And how is that impacting their growth as an athlete? Because I have certainly seen in the last 4 years here a tremendous change in the duration of focus that tends to be present at training. When we talk about how to create focus, we have to calm the mind, we have to calm the body. We do that through the breath, right? That's the connection to life. And so we look at focus as the ability to connect to breath on demand, both in training and in competitive environments. And there's going to be a few tools I'm going to show you here in a minute. Challenges to focus, these are the big 5, right? 4 of these happen at home. Sleep, hunger, hydration, and eating habits, right? Those are the big ones. If those 4 are met, then we're looking at stress management habits. Breath's a big part of that. Coaches, I'll bet as you think about your athletes, and we've talked about this quite a bit, the ones that can focus, typically we see this acronym IAC at play, right? They're intentional, they're attentional, and they're committed in the short term and in the long term. So being able to come to training, being able to focus for an hour and a half, 90 minutes, 2 hours maybe, but also being able to stay committed to those goals over the course of a month, over the course of a training cycle, over the course of 6 months, over the course of a year. There's been a lot of things that have been published. If you're looking for an athlete to look to in terms of just some really interesting nuggets in how he went about training and playing, Kobe Bryant, obviously, unfortunately passed a few years back. There's been some great things that have come out about the way he approached training. This is one of my favorite quotes that he has. The number of hours you practice, right, is the number of hours that you're present during practice. I see a lot of that. I see a lot of athletes going through the motions. The really good ones, they're right here for 90 minutes. When it's over, then they go on. So how can we support this, right? How can we create environments that help support this focus and this energy? A lot of this has to do with balancing of the nervous system. So you've heard this before. We've got sympathetic side of our nervous system, a parasympathetic side. Our sympathetic side, we want to activate under stressful situations. Competitions are stressful situations. Think of sympathetic as the fight or flight, right? Parasympathetic is going to be that rest and digest. This is a recovery mode. The more in balance those 2 sides of our nervous system are, the better we're going to perform and the more enhanced our learning capabilities are. If we're always stressed to the max, that might be okay for a while, but eventually we're going to burn out and we're not going to be able to receive all the good things that come from those stressful competitive situations, right? There's a reason world records tend to always get broken in big events. Those athletes are feeding off of that sympathetic response to the environment. So we've got to balance those 2 things out. A lot of what I did, in fact, I was just in the weight room with the group earlier today. We finished training, we did a parasympathetic downregulation activity, right? Using breath techniques to downregulate, to bring that nervous system back into balance. Sleep tends to be the biggest one. It's 8 solid hours. I talk to a lot of athletes, they say they get 8 to 9 hours of sleep. Well, how much of that is good quality sleep? How much of that is deep sleep? How much of that is REM sleep? How much of that is bookended by looking at screens before we go to bed and after we wake up? The research is suggesting that probably the best thing we can do is to be stimulated by natural light right after we wake up. Right? That tends to stimulate the best response from a parasympathetic standpoint. There are some apps out there that I suggest to athletes. These are the primary ones. Calm and Headspace. For those that are a little bit more advanced, looking for something a little bit more from a meditation concentration standpoint, Waking Up is a great one as well. That's the one on the far right there. There's also some biofeedback tools that we suggest to athletes from time to time, Whoop and Oura Ring. Oura Ring is currently being used by the U.S. ski team. Both are fantastic pieces of feedback tools for athletes. So essentially what they do is they're going to monitor how you're doing throughout the day, throughout the evening, into your sleep cycles, and they're going to give you feedback. How deep you slept, how much REM sleep you got, what your resting heart rate did. And probably the number one thing for monitoring how our nervous system is doing is that heart rate variability metric. It's a really crucial tool. I find athletes use it for 4 to 6 months, their self-awareness goes through the roof, and they really don't need it after that. Right? You're like, oh, okay, I know if I go to bed after 10:30, my score goes way down in the morning. I know if I don't drink enough water the day before, my score goes way down. So things like that are really helpful. So these are the energy tools that we use in the program. Progressive relaxation and body scan are evening-based parasympathetic activities. Focus tools, we use some basic concentration scripts, guided meditation, some box breathing, coherence breathing, which I'm going to have you do in a moment, and then we do some nasal breathing as well as parachute breathing. These are all techniques that are very out there and ubiquitous in the world. You can Google them and kind of learn about them, but they're based upon diaphragmatic nasal breathing. This was a great, I don't know if some of you guys saw this, this was going around this week. This is a Norman Rockwell picture on the left, the classic Thanksgiving feast. Fast forward to 2023. Everybody's looking at their phones. So what are some questions we can ask? I think that's kind of why we're here, right? What are kind of when the rubber meets the road? I'm going to offer these after each section. And really the key is that the questions that we ask are more qualitative and less quantitative. So the typical response, and the one I'm guilty of most often, is, how'd it go? How'd you do? Right? Tell me about it. What happened? Typically when kids hear how, they ultimately move into, am I being judged? Was it good or bad? Right? When athletes hear what happened or tell me about the experience, sometimes they shift into this more qualitative reflection-based response, which is what we want. Right? And just be interested, be curious. Were you nervous or anxious? Or both? Can you feel the difference? Right? Nerves are good. We want the butterfly. We want the blood to start racing through our body. We want the heart rate to start flushing that blood to our big muscles. We want to feel those physiological things. We don't necessarily need to worry about what's going to happen. And so just walking through that dialogue can be a really helpful process. So, imagery, our second pillar. I'm going to have you, before we go into this research, I'm going to have you do a brief exercise that we do with the kids often. It's going to involve a breathing exercise and then an imagery exercise. I'm going to give you this pink sticky note. I'm going to have you write down a couple words after you do it. So, this is what I tell the kids before we do this to the athletes. Everybody's going to have their eyes closed, so no one's watching each other, okay? Don't worry, you're not being judged. But just close your eyes for a minute. Make sure your feet are rooted to the ground flat. Close your mouth. Try to focus on some diaphragmatic nasal breathing. So try to press your tongue to the roof of your mouth. That'll help get air more in through your nose. And imagine your stomach where the air is going, imagine it not necessarily balloon-like, but more cylinder-like, so more like the shape of a can. And I want you to think about and feel getting the air from your nose all the way down into the bottom of that can. And try to make that can fill up from the bottom to the top as you breathe. This is diaphragmatically as you breathe. I want you to slowly try to get your inhales to be a little bit longer and try to match your exhales to your inhales. Now on your next inhale, I want you to count 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And exhale 4. 1, 2, 3. And I want you to keep inhaling 4, but I want you to hold for 2 seconds and then exhale for 4. So you're inhaling for 4, holding for 2, exhaling for 4. Now I want you to try to make your exhales 8. Still inhaling 4, holding 2, exhaling 8. I want you to keep that cycle going, where you're inhaling for 4, holding for 2, exhaling for 8. And I want you to imagine that you're in a room at your house at home. Imagine what's in that room. Maybe it's the kitchen, maybe it's the living room. Try to make those images as clear as you can. Now I want you to imagine on one of the walls in that room there's a door. You're going to walk over that door, you're going to open the door, and behind that door is a staircase that leads up to a room that has a couch and a TV in it. There's a remote there, you pick up the remote, sit on the couch, you turn on the TV. On the TV screen, you're going to see yourself performing in a sport or something creative, whatever it is that you like to do or have done in the past. And I want you to see an image on that screen of a successful performance that you had. A time where you look back and think, that's why I do sport. Try to imagine what that felt like, what that looked like, what that sounded like. Now you can slowly open your eyes, and on that pink piece of paper, I want you to write 2 words that would describe that performance you just recalled. So when we talk about imagery, and I'm going to keep talking here as you write those 2 words, the research that really drives imagery is action-effect hypothesis. And what action-effect hypothesis is it basically says, hey, listen, we can think about a couple different things while we perform a motor skill. We can think about how to do the skill, or we can think about what we want to happen. And what we do here at the club is we try to educate the athletes between the difference between the two. Okay? The research suggests that once you've learned a skill, and you can repeat it in a variety of situations, focusing on what you want to happen, what the research calls external cues, what you want to happen as a result of your movement, will always be better from a performance standpoint. Okay? Internal focus, thinking about how to do something, is important. We have to learn skills. And so what we do with the athletes is we try to just help them distinguish between the two. Right? And the goal and the message is, hey, when we go to perform, we want to be in our body. We want to be responding to the environment. We want to be letting our training be automated. right? That's when our reaction times are quicker. That's when our response times are quicker. Right? In fact, when we have internal focus, when we think about how to do something, step-by-step process of where to put my arm, where to put my hand, where to put my shin, my boot, it triggers parts of the brain that are associated with self-perception. Right? And the research goes further and says when you have internal focus and high anxiety, if you put that athlete into a stressful situation, you're going to have very poor, often what the research calls a choking experience. Right? So images are fantastic cues, and they're fantastic external cues. So these are some of the tools we use with the athletes. Basic imagery, and I had you go through your room and just kind of think about what kinds of things were around your house or your room. That's basic imagery, creating basic images. Sports specific is going through and recalling an experience. And those things take time and practice. We don't just have that ability. You probably noticed it can be a little hard sometimes to create those images. You know what's in your room, but it's kind of hard sometimes to create that image on demand. So what are some good questions to ask athletes in and around imagery? What does it look like? Can you show me what it feels like? Trying to get them connecting feeling with what's actually happening, right? Trying to bridge that gap. Right? How many times, coaches, have you had an athlete, you say, well, what are you feeling when you make that jump? Or what are you feeling in that turn? And they say, oh, I feel this. And you're like, man, that's not what's happening, right? How do we bring those two things closer together? We ask qualitative questions. We ask them to describe what they're experiencing. And then we show them in 2D, very non-judgmentally, hey, this is what's happening. So let's try and match these two things up. That's what great coaches do. Motivation. It's probably my favorite of all four of these. I went to grad school thinking sports psychology was going to be all about performance and zen and getting in the zone and flow, and I came away thinking Harold Dweck should run for president. She's fantastic. And you probably are pretty familiar with Mindset. This is her book that she wrote for, people like us, like just people trying to figure it out. A really fascinating read, if you're interested, is the research behind mindset. And that's a book she published a while back. It's called Self Theories. So I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about what the research says in her own words, because I cannot do it justice. But essentially, we're all pretty familiar with the idea of growth and fixed mindset. Right? A fixed mindset person is someone who believes their ability is kind of what they have, right? It's what they're born with. No amount of effort's really going to change that too much. I got what I got, right? I'm good at math, I'm bad at English, or vice versa. When Dweck and her team did research on fixed mindset individuals, some really interesting things came out. And I'm going to show you this because I think it's important to look at this and then talk about where we want to be on the other side of this growth mindset. So bear with me here while I cue this up. This was a TED Talk she did a while back. And again, she's talking about some research in and around students who were fixed mindset.
Instead of luxuriating in the power of yet, they were gripped in the tyranny of now. So what do they do next? I'll tell you what they do next. In one study, they told us they would probably cheat the next time instead of studying more if they failed the test. In another study, after a failure, they looked for someone who did worse than they did, so they could feel really good about themselves.
I've never done that.
And in study after study, they have run from difficulty. Scientists measured the electrical activity from the brain as students confronted an error. On the left, you see the fixed mindset students. There's hardly any activity. They run from the error. They don't engage with it. But on the right, you have the students with the growth mindset, the idea that abilities can be developed. They engage deeply. Their brain is on fire with yet. They engage deeply. They process the error. They learn from it, and they correct it. How are we raising our children? Are we raising them for now instead of yet? Are we raising kids who are obsessed with getting A's? Are we raising kids who don't know how to dream big dreams? Their biggest goal is getting the next A or the next test score? And are they carrying this need for constant validation with them into their future lives? Maybe because employers are coming to me and saying, we have already raised a generation of young workers who can't get through the day without an award.
So coaches know how to build these mastery-oriented environments. Mastery-oriented is another word for growth mindset, right? Being able to grapple with not being there yet. Being able to tackle problems. And there's a lot of great coaches in this room, and I've seen them all in their various disciplines ask these questions. What's the environment? What's it asking of our athlete? Are we comparing athlete to athlete? Or are we comparing athlete to themselves? And using that word yet is a big one. Yeah, you're not there. You did not meet your goals. Yeah. Here's what we need to do. So how can we do that collectively? Again, this idea of really asking athletes qualitative questions about their experience, being aware of their desire for approval, singling out, pointing out grit when we see it culturally, when we see it in the athletic environment that they're in. Habituating reflection time, so making sure athletes have time after events with a pen and with a journal. How'd it go? Write it down. Right. And asking questions, being curious. We're going to get to this a little bit more in depth. But if there's a secret weapon to elite level athletes that I've observed, it's this ability to be curious. What's possible? I really like, just touch on this, and there's some coaches here who have some great metrics to use, but I like to use this phrase, data strips emotion out of the equation. So if we can quantify for athletes their progress over time in a very objective, data-driven way, it tends to strip the emotion from the experience. Why is that? Because most of us and most athletes think of themselves as their very best experience, right? Their best performance. That's who I am. That's who I am as an athlete. I can do that every time. The reality is that we're somewhere below our best and above our worst. 80% of the time, we spend somewhere in the middle. And if we can quantify that for each athlete, depending on what their discipline is, for time-based sports here at the club, using a percentage off the podium is a great way to do that. Right? What was your percentage out of third place, right? Relative to time? If you can see that percentage decrease over the course of a few races, that can be tremendous for kids, as opposed to, got 15th again, right? What does that mean? When we see this in real life, it's so cool. And it's rare, but this is an example of this mastery mindset. This is Giannis Antetokounmpo after the 2021 NBA Finals. He just won the MVP 2 years prior, won the finals the year before, and lost in the first round. They were the #1 seed, they lost to the 8th seed. The reporter asked him if he thinks the season was a failure.
I just asked about the exact same question, but I'm curious for you. Do you view this season as a failure?
Oh my God. Okay, because I'm not enough. You asked me the same question last year, Eric. Okay, do you get the promotion every year on your job? No, right? So every year you work is a failure. Yes or no? No. Every year you work towards something, towards a goal, right? Which is to get a promotion, to be able to take care of your family, to be able, I don't know, provide a house for them or take care of your parents. You work towards a goal. It's not a failure. It's steps to success. You know, and if you've never I don't want to make personal. So there's always steps to it. You know, Michael Jordan played 15 years, won 6 championships. The other 9 years was a failure. That's what you're telling me. I'm asking you a question. Yes or no? Okay, exactly. So why are you asking that question? It's a wrong question. There's no failure in sports. You know, there's good days, bad days. Some days you are able to be successful, some days you're not. Some days it's your turn, some days it's not your turn. And that's what sports is about. You don't always win. Some other people's going to win. And this year, somebody else is going to win. Similar to that, we're going to come back next year, try to be better, try to build good habits, try to play better, not have a 10-day stretch with play bad basketball. You know, and hopefully we can win a championship. So 50 years from 1971 to 2021 that we didn't win a championship, it was 50 years of failure. No, it was not. It was steps to it, you know, and we were able to win one, hopefully we win another one.
I love that. Rarely do you see an athlete be that vulnerable, right, to talk about that mindset, but that's what they all possess. It's that ability to just be like, I'm in it for the long term. I'm in it for the long term. So in the mindset training program here at the club, we have a few tools for the athletes, really revolving around using worksheets to continually and consistently define goals, outcome goals, process goals, and resonance goals, and making sure those are all balanced. And it's not just at the beginning of the season. We want them to do it month 1, month 2, month 5, and particularly leading up to big events. And communicating that with parents, communicating that with coaches. This is what I want to achieve, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is why I'm going to do it. My hope is that we've painted a picture where if we have athletes that are calm and able to focus under pressure, can create clear images, can focus on the right cues in training and competition, and have a mastery mindset, that they're eventually going to find that flow state. So flow is not something that is just available all the time. There's steps to it. And I have this idea of connected confidence next to it, because flow and confidence are very related. So Chief Sent Me High was the guy who did the original research around flow. And he said, look, here's the conditions, right? Focus, that's an energy domain. Clarity goals, that's a motivational domain. Imagery, challenge, skill, balance. All these things are learned and enhanced. What does it look like? The cool thing about Steamboat is there are world-class athletes everywhere, and you would never know it. There's a few in this room today. And I know there's one in particular that I've always been fascinated with his feats, and I might call on him here in a minute to tell us a little bit about what flow is to him, because I know he's gotten there, and we've talked about it quite a bit. Somebody's played rugby at a world-class international level, he's competed in crazy ultra events involving biking across the entire state of Alaska in record time, is an entrepreneur and a very successful person. Bush, would you mind sharing with the group sort of what flow is for you?
I'll stand up. But I guess flow for me in the shorter term sport was a little bit harder to come by, but in the longer distance, and a lot of people when I tell them this, so I never listen to music when I'm racing, doing anything. So whether that be 6 hours, 12 hours, 48 hours, 2 weeks, I never have anything in my head. But if I'm training, podcast, I'm listening to something all the time. When I go out and say my flow state is, I'm consciously thinking about what's going on as I'm going nutrition, how's my body feeling, and just getting into that zone and being conscious. And he talked about Alaska, but no matter how cold it is or anything else, it doesn't bother me, because once I'm in that state and I'm feeling comfortable about it, I'll just keep going and I'm sweating and I'll just keep talking to myself, and as I said, no music going, and then sort of I get into that state myself, I've always got things to go on, and I know I've prepared myself physically enough, and the big as just keeping my head in the game. And it goes, and you know, what we just talked about there, I don't know how many times I've started when things start going sideways, I just start box breathing. You know, if I'm on my bike or if I'm hiking or anything, I just start box breathing. And then I'll start saying things out loud to myself. Nobody around, and I'll just start, I'll never quit. I don't know whether you've heard of chair right, I'll never quit. So in a race, I probably said that 1,000 times when things started going sideways. That's just some tools that I use to get myself.
Thanks, Graham. For those of you guys who don't know Graham, Bush, as he's referred to, owns Manic Training here in town. Unbelievable athlete. If you ever see him on the trail, don't try to ride with him. Suggestion. So, when we talk about flow, oftentimes the research suggests that the experience of expertise and flow are very connected. So we're trying to get into, is the skill level tasked with the challenge? And as you look at this matrix, we're trying to get into flow. It's quite easy to go from arousal or control into flow. It's nearly impossible to go from apathy, worry, boredom into flow. So if you don't always have to get directly into flow, but if you can get close, chances are you're going to cross over pretty easily. So we've defined those conditions. Thanks, guys, for coming. Good luck with hockey.
Thanks, Luke.
Here's the characteristics. Here's what we see in athletes when they're in flow. And I don't know about you, but when I've moved without worry, when I've lost sense of time, when I've merged awareness and action, it's generally a pretty content place to be. Pretty content place to be. And so the research goes on to say, flow may not be a component of happiness, it might actually be a cause of it. Graham talked about some of the self-talk that he uses. That's a way to keep athletes in flow. So here's some self-talk tools that we use. Stacking, R3, which R3 just stands for recognize, relax, and reframe. And then talking to ourselves, particularly endurance athletes, research suggests if you can talk to yourself in third person, it's more impactful. So I want to just summarize and finish here real quickly and leave some time for question. I mentioned this idea of flow and confidence, and I feel that in my experience, the most successful athletes from a performance standpoint and from a human standpoint outside of their sport tend to enter into flow states and states of confidence more often and more easily than others. And I had you write on these sticky notes up here what you want for your kids or your athletes, and we had you describe your best performances. Can everybody take a guess what these two groups over here might represent? Flow on the left, confidence on the right. And over here, winning on the left, performance on the right. If we start from here, right, this is what we want. It's what we remember, right? It's where our best performances came from. If we start from there, we'll get there. We'll win and perform. Right? But we need to start there. Make sure we get into those states as often as we can. What does calmness look like? Again, Kobe Bryant.
What I try to do is just try to be still and understand that things come and go, emotions come and go. The important thing is to accept them all, to embrace them all, and then you can choose to do with them what you want versus being controlled by emotion. You know, a lot of times I've seen players, even myself, you know, when I was younger, being consumed by a particular fear, and to the point where you're saying, okay, no, it's not good to feel fear. I shouldn't be nervous in a situation like that. And it does nothing but grow. Versus stepping back and saying, yeah, I am nervous about the situation. Yeah, I am fearful about the situation. Well, what am I afraid of? And then you kind of unpack it. And then it gives you the ability to look at really what it is, which is nothing more than your imagination running its course. You know? What I try to do is
Calmness. About confidence. Competence leads to confidence. I had a professor in grad school who used to always say that competence leads to confidence. So what is competence? Anybody know who this NFL player is based on this scouting report? Because he personifies competence. I love some of the descriptions in here. Not what you're looking for in terms of physical stature. Could make it in the right system, but certainly not for everybody. Looks a little frail.
Tom Brady.
Here's competence embodied.
You know, I would complain all the time that the guys ahead of me were getting more opportunity than I was. There was a certain amount of repetitions in practice. The starter would get 20, the backup would get 10, and I would get 2. And I'd go in and I'd say, well, how can I ever get better? All these guys get all the reps and I only get 2. And he said, just go in there and focus with the 2 that you got and make them as perfect as you possibly can. So I said, okay. So that's what I did. They put me in for those 2, man. I'd sprint in there like it was Super Bowl 49. Let's go, boys. Here we go. What play we got? And I did really well with those 2 because I brought enthusiasm. I brought some energy. And I had a little more confidence in myself. And it went from 2 reps to getting 4 reps because those 2 were pretty good. Then I had 4 good reps. Then I got 10 good reps. And before you knew it, through this new attitude, through this new shift that Greg had said to me, you know, focus on what you can control. Focus on what you're getting, not what anyone else is getting. Whenever you get an opportunity, you take advantage of it. You treat it like it's the Super Bowl. You treat it like it's game day. Go out there and treat practice like no one else does. And I did that every single day. And it was a lot. It was taxing on me. It was a lot of stress for me, even in high school. When I look back at those times, it wasn't probably like a typical college experience because I was really motivated to play. But I had to take...
Tom Brady. You know he was drafted to play for the Montreal Expos. He was a great athlete. Great athlete. The last one I want to leave you with is this idea of curiosity. I think this is the secret weapon. If you have apples to apples, you have 2 great athletes, you have that have trained hard, that have worked hard, that have put in the time, put in the hours. On paper, they're the same. If you have one that's just a little bit more curious-minded, they're the ones typically that are going to rise in stressful situations. Are you guys familiar, anybody here familiar with Courtney Dauwalter? Okay, Courtney Dauwalter is probably the best male or female ultra runner in the world right now. She just won the Chamonix UTMB. Did you know that our very own Dave Stewart has personally coached Courtney Dauwalter in cross country, right? Do you? Dave, how was Courtney Dauwalter as an athlete in college? How would you describe her?
She's a wonderful person. She wasn't that confident as an athlete 17 years ago. I really enjoyed it and had some great success in running and skiing as a high school athlete. We struggled in college at a new level, a higher level. It kind of became more serious as she went through college, but the skills that she'll talk about in this and that I think that she's known for now, which are quite remarkable, are something that she developed later in life. And she was certainly not born with and didn't have when she was a high school senior or a college senior. So, yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I think that's exactly what I want to just use this book to elucidate the end on. This is Courtney Dauwalter talking about a opportunity that she had to go and race in Chamonix this last summer. She ultimately won the race, but it was not something she had planned. So she's being interviewed, and the interviewer is asking her, why are you choosing to do this race? You just did these 2 huge races here in the U.S. On paper, this probably isn't a great decision. This is her response.
We know, there's no wondering then what would have happened. Now we get to find out.
For sure. So it's the challenge then of doing all 3 runs of this race on its own that's kind of bringing you here, is it?
Absolutely, yeah. The challenge of adding this 3rd one on is it's big and it's unknown. I don't know how my body or mind are going to react during the race, so that's what is really drawing me to go for it and see, because I'm just curious.
Yeah, for sure. That's really exciting.
How many athletes have you ever heard say, just curious? See how this goes. Most of them think it, but they don't say it. Right? What's possible? What could happen here? Right? As opposed to, boy, I hope the worst doesn't happen. Right? So I'll leave you with this thought, and that is, as Dave mentioned sort of in the start of the discussion, our goal with the program, yes, it's to build mindset performance. It's to teach kids how to be calm, how to relax their bodies, how to calm their minds under pressure, create clear images, create mastery-oriented approaches to improvement in performance, and ultimately find that flow state more often. I don't know about you, but for my kids, if they're 25, 30 years old, and they're able to do those things, if they're calm, and curious, and competent, hardworking, I'm going to be pretty thrilled. Right? And I hope that these tools that we can introduce to them here in this athletic setting, they can use to carry over into whatever they choose to do in life, right? Whether it's to be an elite level athlete or not. So that's our goal. Appreciate your time. I would love to entertain a few questions. If anybody has any questions, we've got a few minutes and a little bit longer, but want to open up that now. Thoughts? And we've got some tremendous resources and coaches. I just did some math in my mind, just on who I could see in the room. I know there's at least 4 gold medals, at least 100 years of World Cup experience as athletes or coaches in the room. So don't hold back. I know you have some thoughts. Feel free, jump in. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question. I'm new to the club, and I'm curious to understand how this gets scaffolded in for the athletes.
Sure, that's a good question. So, as Dave mentioned, I typically work with high school age and up. So what I will do is spend chunks of training time with each group. In the past, I've gone sort of one day here, one day there, one day here. Now I'm spending more of a week-long session with each group. And each time I come in, I present material, I present tools, I observe, I talk to athletes, but I make sure that they have an understanding of where the program is, but then I also give them experience and time with the tools in a group setting. So for instance, last week I did some work, or 2 weeks ago I did some work with Anne's group. So I went to their yoga, we talked about concentration, we did a couple exercises down in the gym after their workout. Parasympathetic relaxation, breathing. When I come to her group next time, we'll jump into imagery. We'll talk about images. The program I should show you, when the athletes click on it, this is what they see. So it's simply a Google Classroom, and they can go into each section. Each section will have some text, and then at the bottom, we'll have the audio files of the actual tools that they can utilize. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
Love this stuff. As you know, there's so much the athletes are doing before high school, right? There's only one person here, you can only do so much, but I'm thinking about all the, in a good way, the conflicts maybe, like think about our U10 skiers, how much they're already skiing, they're getting into competitions. It'd be so interesting to see how we can filter this back in, not that we're not doing it, but more intentionally early on, because they're getting conflicting messages in a competitive environment like this, U10, U12, they're already in all that stuff. Not saying we're not doing it, but it'd be so interesting to be more intentional, because I gotta believe that the earlier you present this to these folks, and by U10, U12, they're already sizing each other up. It'd be interesting to see if we could be intentional about pulling it earlier. Not implying we're not, but just, I don't know how you think about that.
No, I think that's right. I think that's the next evolution of this, and you know, I think having Brian on board with the club now, he has a tremendous background in the education, coaches' education system and process, and knows how to implement these things. And Dave and John have done a fantastic job to date. I think that is the next evolution. So how do we take this program from the older kids, the high school age kids, and how do we bring it down into those groups that are the U10, U12, 12 age groups? So I'm excited for that challenge. We're not there yet, right? I think it's something that we can make some strides on, and something I'm excited about doing over the next couple of years. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question that kind of piggybacks off that. If you have the younger kids, in the U10 advice on how to work
Yeah.
with the younger kids? Like from the parents, not just the coaches.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had good experience with breath work and breathing techniques with the younger kids, particularly when you get them into smaller groups, groups of 2 or 3. Groups of 10 or 15, it tends not to work quite as well. I know from my personal experience, my kids have certainly benefited from some of the apps. They tend to be a little bit more, that just tends to speak their language a little bit more. So I found the apps to be really helpful. And I think just trying to manage that environment as well as we can, that's the role of the training, right? How do we create that sort of calm, curious environment at home, right? That's the number one thing. And then I think just taking their cues, what are they interested in? What are they interested in exploring? What kinds of themes are they interested in exploring? Finding movies and documentaries and books, things like that that help facilitate that. But from a cognitive level, the research would suggest that a lot of these themes that we're presenting are typically age 14 and up is where they're going to start to be received with some attention. Make sense? Yes, sir.
I feel like the questions that you had in the middle of the presentation, could be applicable to some younger kids, I think, and that can send a strong message about what they should be focusing on, what that messaging from the parent, what the parent folks are focused on.
Right.
Well, because they might not know what they're feeling, but at least get them starting to think about it. Oh,
Right.
mom asked me how this was feeling.
Any other questions? You make that bigger? Well, thanks again for your time. I'm going to stick around if anybody has any questions. And please feel free to reach out if I can be of any resource or help here at the club. And I appreciate you coming. Thanks for